Welcome to another episode of Conversation with Scholars, where I interview current graduate students, postdocs, faculty, and staff in order for us to better understand the graduate school application process and to learn about the graduate school journeys of these scholars and where they're at now. On this episode, I interview Rebecca Levine, a current PhD student in education studies at the University of California, San Diego. Becca is a licensed independent clinical social worker who partners with communities to understand and promote social and emotional well-being of students, teachers, and families. Becca was accepted to 9 PhD programs and 1 master program. Today, she will speak about her graduate school interview process and her strategies for tackling the graduate school application. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your research interests, and maybe your career goals.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Becca. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a second-year PhD student in education studies at UC San Diego. I was born and raised in the US. I was born in Boston, primarily grew up in Florida, was back in Boston for a little bit, and now back in San Diego for my PhD. In terms of career goals, I'm not sure. I am really enjoying some of the research that I'm doing. And so I do want to stay in the research world, whether that's in academia or potentially working for a school district, still to be determined, but trying to keep my options open. And my research focus is generally mental health and well-being in schools. It's a little bit broad for right now, but looking at ways to understand how students and teachers describe well-being, what's important to them in terms of their well-being, and how to partner with communities to promote that within their schools or their community.
Well, that sounds like really great stuff there. So before you started your program at UCSD, what did you do? What did you do? Like, did you conduct research? Were you a student? Did you work?
Yeah, great question. So I graduated college back in 2013. So since then, and I applied for PhD programs in December 2019 to start in the fall of 2020. So I had a few years before undergrad and my PhD program. I think there are really like 3 phases of what I did in that time. The first was I took a gap year. It was called City Year. I did this in Miami, and what it is it's an AmeriCorps program, so it's kind of like Teach for America, but I didn't have my own classroom. So I was in a school in a 9th grade algebra classroom, actually, and there was a full teacher there, so I wasn't in charge of the classroom, but I would do small group tutoring and behavior support and attendance support. And so I did that for a year. It's a perfect gap year, which I can talk more about if you're interested in school, anything to do with kids, really. And then I got a master's in social work. And I did that in Boston at Boston College. So I moved up there and had different internships in a group home and in a high school. And then I worked for 2 years as an outpatient therapist. And during that time, I was also volunteering in a lab at Boston University. I'd been thinking about getting my PhD. It always was kind of intriguing, but confusing. I didn't really know what it meant or how to do it. But I had a foot in the door, in a sense, with a lab in Boston University, who I had just cold emailed because I thought their research was pretty cool. So I'd been doing that and really liked it. And then 2 years into working as a full-time social worker, was like, I'm feeling excited about this PhD thing. Let me try to do research full time though. And like, so you can tell I was like really careful with this, like really be sure it's what I want to do. So I transitioned from being a full-time therapist and working with mental health with youth and adults to being a lab manager, also at Boston University, but for a brand new developmental psychology lab. So I was a lab manager for about a year and a half. Fantastic experience. And then I felt ready and excited to apply. I felt I had some research experience under my belt. I had narrowed down my research focus. And so I took the plunge at that point. So it took some time, I guess, to apply to PhD programs and kind of got those different experiences before applying.
Awesome. That sounds like great experiences. A couple of things that I wanted just to kind of ask for, because I do have a lot of subscribers that ask, should I do a PhD right after undergrad? And it seems like obviously you didn't do that. You took a little, like maybe a couple of years to decide like what you wanted to like research potentially, and maybe like a career path that you wanted to pursue, and then maybe exploring the PhD option. So what would you tell subscribers in terms of when is the right time to pursue a PhD?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot too. I would say that if you are, first of all, if you're in undergraduate right now and you're having this question, it's okay. It's super, super typical. I had no idea in undergraduate that I was going to get a PhD. And so I did take my time. I mean, I feel really fortunate that I was able to connect with different labs and still get some research experience. You're totally fine if it takes a little bit. I am so thankful for all the experiences that I had before my PhD. I learned so much, and I think I am getting more out of my PhD, I would say, having done all of that, as opposed to if I had applied right away. I also think by getting some more research experience, I was able to be a stronger candidate and an applicant in the end also. So there are, I would say it tends to depend on the type of field you're in. In some fields, I think it's typical to start PhDs a little bit younger than others. So for example, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but I applied to some community psychology and applied development type programs and also some education programs. And I found education programs, the students are a little bit older, a lot of them had been teachers, and in psychology programs, the students in the PhD were a little bit younger. That being said, there is an average, but there's also such a range. And so if you're, no matter how old you are right now, and if you're feeling ready or if you want to wait, that's okay. I would still encourage you to give it a shot, and also to reach out and to talk to more people about it and to watch more of this show to learn more. But I waited a while, and I'm glad I did. And I had the privilege of doing that. And it can work out.
Yeah, I would say I would echo what Becca's saying here. I took 4 years after my master's to pursue a PhD, and I think because I was only applying to education programs, I knew someone had told me in undergrad, if you're applying for like the education field, you should probably go get some practical experience that you can maybe feed off of or work off of or apply with the research side of the PhD, right? So I really took that to heart, I guess. And also I was burnt out. Like I couldn't do undergrad, master's, and a PhD personally. I needed like that break. I wanted to make some money because obviously being a student, you don't make too much money. And so I was thinking about that as well when I was applying for PhD programs, or at least my journey. So I can definitely say, similar to what Becca was saying, that I think for education field, it's crucial, in my opinion, to have that experience, because then when you're discussing this in classes, which you're going to be discussing a lot in your PhD classes, you can bring those experiences into the conversation, and obviously to the projects you're working on, right? So I would say for the education field that you should at least try to get some type of experience, whether it's full-time work experience or in undergrad, maybe volunteering for a long period of time in some type of teaching education opportunity. But I would also say that in psychology, I feel like psychology is one of those majors where you kind of just go through after undergrad to get a PhD. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because a lot of people want to be like psychologists, and to be a psychologist you need a PhD, right? So if that's your goal, then why wait? Why take a gap year? Maybe that's the reason why. I'm not sure. But yeah.
That's a good point. I would totally agree with education. Some programs, they absolutely, they require you in all intents and purposes to have some experience before you start. And I would add too, when you're thinking about your CV or your resume, no matter what field you're in, you can almost guaranteed find something you've done and apply it to make you a strong candidate for a PhD. So for example, I worked as a therapist for a number of years, spent a lot of time talking to people, listening, and in a personal statement, I can say, I think, I have these skills that could translate to interviewing for a research project. So there are all these like generalizable skills that you can find within your experiences that aren't at all like wasted time. Even if it's not in research, there's still things that are transferable to help you stand out when you are ready to apply for a PhD program.
Right. And since we're on the topic of research, you talked about earlier that you just reached out to a professor, I'm guessing, or maybe like a director of a research lab or something. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I do get a lot of people asking me like, am I not going to be able to get into a PhD because I don't have research experience? So can you talk about how you sent that email? Like, how did you go about, what was that process like? Did you research the lab first? did you like, how did you construct the email? How did you ask?
Yeah, so I moved to Boston and I had done a little bit of research in undergrad. Um, and as I was saying before, I was curious about doing more research, still didn't really know exactly in what. And I was at Boston College and I was looking around at different faculty and what they were doing. And I didn't really see anything at my university that spoke to me, that I was super passionate about. And so I was looking, Boston has a lot of universities, so I was really lucky to be there. And I found a woman who was doing school-based mental health equity work. She had her own lab at Boston University. And I gave it a shot and I reached out and I sent an email. I think it's helpful in an email to faculty to try to keep it short, because as you know, like as everyone is, they're pretty busy. To keep it short, to get it to the point, to share a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your interests, and then a question, a very clear question. And I don't remember exactly what mine was, but probably something to the extent of, do you have any opportunities for an additional research assistant in your lab? Or even if it's like, do you have any advice to someone who, you know, just moved to Boston and wants to get into research? So not everyone responds, for sure. I was really lucky that I reached out to her, and she's wonderful. So it wasn't just luck. Like I found someone who I think is really fantastic. Uh, and I would say the worst case of someone not responding, that's okay. Like, I know it can sting. It's not personal, and you don't know unless you try. And you know, if the faculty can't do it, if they don't have capacity, they won't respond, and that's a form of communication, and then that's okay. But you can also get some opportunities like that, or by even asking, you know, do you or does someone you know have any availability in their lab? So I would recommend it if you feel comfortable with it. I know it can be really awkward. I'm happy to help like draft any emails too. I can give my information at the end if you want someone to look it over. It can be helpful to do things like that.
Yeah, no, I would say that I did something similar as an undergraduate student, but like I was trying to find some summer experiences. So I literally just emailed, like cold emailed like random professors that did work that I really liked, I guess. And I did the research obviously prior, so I read their bios, I read some of like maybe their publications, maybe not the full thing, just kind of like maybe abstract, maybe results, finding stuff like that. So I reached
Yeah.
out. I remember like reaching out to someone at Stanford because I was planning to apply to Stanford for either their master's or PhD program. And I was like, you know what? I need some connections there. So let me just reach out to like some professor at Stanford. And I like shockingly, the person actually responded. They didn't have funding for me to go out there in the summer because obviously I'm from a different state than California. And so I strictly asked them like, do you have funding for me to work on a project with you? And you know, something along those lines. And the professor said no, but they responded saying like that they were impressed with me, you know, seeking these opportunities. And so yeah, so for me, even though I didn't get the opportunity, the response was just kind of, I guess, affirming. It was affirming that I was kind of doing the right thing in terms of cold calling or cold emailing these professors. And I did it with a range of professors, and honestly, a lot of them didn't respond. But I just thought, you know, why not try? What's
Yeah.
the worst that could happen? A no, and that's fine, you know. So I would suggest and advise that you do that if you're struggling with finding opportunity for research, or maybe your, you know, undergraduate school doesn't offer research opportunities. Because I know like a lot of liberal arts specific colleges don't offer that type of experience. So you definitely want to reach out to just professors. Mostly, I would say close to where you live. That way, because a lot of faculty members don't have funding for like people outside of maybe their department or students from their department. So try to find something close that you can like commute to, or maybe something remote, since we can do more remote work nowadays.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, if you find someone who's perfect, you know, perfectly aligned with your interests, and it's not where you live, see any, like, sometimes there's data analysis that you can do from afar. Exactly. And like you said, I did the same thing with mostly looking at websites. I was on universities' websites, going to their education department, going through their list of PIs and faculty, and maybe it's a long way to search, but I spent some time on that, and that's how I found some people too. So yeah,
Yeah,
100% agree.
yeah, and then just quickly, just to kind of wrap up that question, if you look at their CVs as well, or maybe just their bios, they sometimes say like, okay, here's the current project I'm working on, and here's how much funding I have for that project for this many years. And obviously, what I would do as a strategy is, if there's a project that's still, they're still working on for maybe a couple more years. So if the project says like $1 million for a 2020 to 2025 project, and the title sounds, somewhat interesting to what you want to get into, then I would specifically state that in the email, say like, okay, I looked at your CV, or I reviewed your work, and it looks like you're working on this project titled this, this, and this. Is there room for me to participate? Is there funding for me as well? Like stuff like that. And that's going to kind of give the faculty member a different impression on who you are, and because you did your research, you did your work, right? And it shows interest too. So
Yeah.
just kind of do that background research before you email anybody. But just to kind of wrap up this segment here, how did your prior experiences prepare you to apply for PhD programs?
Yeah. So I think, on the topic of finding research opportunities, I think it was really helpful to have been able to be a lab manager, and to have been a research assistant for this other lab at Boston University prior to that. I think because it helped me know that I liked research, it helped me know what type of research I liked. And it also then is able to show the PhD programs that you apply to that what is kind of involved in the research process. You know what it entails. So you're a safer bet in a sense for someone who's applying, because they're like, they've done that and they know how it works. So, and they're still interested in doing it. Absolutely, though, those life experiences, especially working with mental health and with education, if I hadn't been out in communities, working one-on-one in groups with families, I don't think I'd be able to do the work that I do now very well at all. And that's not the case with every research topic or in every field, but my life experiences, I think, were really, really prepared me to be able to kind of even have the research questions to begin with, and to know how to partner with others, to empower others, and to do this work in partnership with others. So I think those life experiences and talking to friends for sure. If you have any friends who've had graduate school experience, or are thinking about it and are on this journey with you, or online forums, there's so many out there where people are asking questions and then responding. So there are a lot of resources that are out there that can help. And I did that as well. I had some friends who I talked to, and found some websites that were helpful that I don't really remember now, but I can let you know what they were. So the resources are there to be able to help too. But I would say I don't like, I try to look at all the experiences I've had as super powerful and engaging, and have led me to this point, and I wouldn't have changed anything. So even if it does, if you're like feeling like you're older, I think it's still so formative, and I do really recommend to take a couple of years to before you apply for PhDs.
Yeah, it sounds like it helped you find that maybe like a purpose, right? Like I feel like PhD,
Yeah.
you have to have a purpose, you have to have a reason. And they ask you this in the application, like, what is your purpose for pursuing a PhD? And it sounds like all those experiences provided you with some insight on that purpose. And I think just similar to you, like the reason why I decided to pursue PhD was because I also had a purpose, right? Like my purpose is to transform education for a certain population. And so and that came from personal experience, but also my research experience and then my undergraduate experiences too. And obviously also I working at a community college helped me kind of shape what those questions were, like you were saying, as well as what I wanted to do with my career. So I do think that experiences, whether it's personal, whether it's research, whether it's like a practical, like volunteer internship, all those things do help with determining like if a PhD program is for you, and maybe what questions to ask and things along those lines. And these are questions, or these are things that they're going to be asking you during the application and interview part of the process. So let's jump into the application process. So tell us, how many PhD programs did you apply to? And if you remember which programs and what institution, name those as well.
Yeah, sounds good. So I have a list here, so I'm just going to read from there. But I've applied to 11 PhD programs in fall 2020. I applied to UC Berkeley in their social welfare department. I applied to NYU for psychology and social intervention, Harvard in education, Boston College for applied developmental and educational psychology, Stanford in their developmental and psychological sciences program, and UC San Diego, where I'm at now, in education, University of Washington for educational psychology, University of Illinois at Chicago for community psychology, Boston University for applied human development, UC Santa Barbara for education, and University of Southern California in urban education policy.
Cool. And so a couple questions just to kind of tie to that. So how did you decide which programs to apply to? And then also, which ones did you get into? And finally, what was the other question? Shoot. Let's start off with those two, and then we'll jump from there.
Okay. Yeah, I decided to apply to programs. I would say 3 different main factors went into it. One was advisor and the potential fit of the advisor and the program to my own interests. So that is really key because you'll most likely be on different projects with them, and they're going to be the person helping you and supporting you throughout graduate school. So having someone who is kind and caring and also has interests that are aligned with yours can be helpful. I was thinking about places that I wanted to live also, looking at different cities that I wanted to spend up to 5-6 years. So that was big for me. I was also moving with a partner, so it was a little bit of a joint decision. And finances played a role as well. Some PhD programs have like guaranteed funding. Some will, yeah, and some, you have to pay for it yourself. There's just like different ranges of funding packages. So I would spend time looking at their websites and seeing what they offered PhD students in terms of tuition remission and stipends. And I only applied to programs where it was pretty much guaranteed that PhD students are going to be fully funded throughout their time there.
Cool. So then speaking about funding, which programs, or you said that all of them offered fully funded mostly. Can you talk about maybe where did you get in, and maybe how did you decide which program to attend? You talked about like a couple factors, but what like made you choose UCSD?
Yeah, so I got into 10 graduate programs. The reason I have a question mark at the end is these were all PhD programs that I applied to. So I applied to 11 PhD programs, and I got into 9 PhD programs plus the master's program at Harvard. So at Harvard, when you apply for their PhD program, you have an option to check a box that says, if I don't get into the PhD program, would I want to be considered for a master's? And they say it doesn't affect your PhD application. So I checked the box, and I did not get into the PhD program. I did get into the master's program. So nine PhD programs and 1 master's program. And what was your other question? Sorry.
Yeah, the other question was, what made you choose UCSD out of all the schools? Because it seems like you got into 10 or 9 PhD, 1 master's. Like, why did you not go to Harvard, for example? I guess a question that I think people would want to ask, right? So
Yeah.
what made you pursue a degree at UCSD?
Yeah, it was a hard decision. The programs were amazing, and faculty were incredible, and the other students who were there. So it wasn't easy. The reason I decided not to go to Harvard is I did already have a master's degree, a master's in social work, and I was looking to get my PhD. Harvard was very expensive as well, and I already felt, I had really fantastic options. I was super excited about some of these other programs. And so I wanted to dive into a PhD program and not spend extra money and extra time in a master's. I then spent a lot of time talking to faculty, talking to current students, talking to who my cohort would be and getting on some Zoom calls with them. UC San Diego seemed like a good fit. I just love the advisor that I have and the work that we get to do together. She was a really phenomenal teacher, a middle school and high school teacher for a number of years. And I wanted to learn from her in terms of how to be really just there for your students. She's really equity focused, she's really social justice focused, and has been, her whole career. And so someone who's deeply within the education field and thinking about issues of equity and justice kind of pervasively throughout everything that they do. And she also had a background in psychology. So in a lot of ways, it seemed like a really good fit to come here and work with her. And I loved just the nature of how her work is with communities, and it's community engaged, and it's these partnerships where you're not necessarily going in and just collecting data and leaving, but you're working with groups to see what their interests are and what questions they have, and trying to empower groups and communities. And so I think the research really fit here, and that's a big reason that I chose UCSD.
Awesome. So I read this stat recently, or maybe not recently, but like when I was applying for master's programs in the first round, so back in 2015, that in order for you to get accepted into a graduate program, that you should be applying to 9 to 12 programs. There's some stat that says like your odds are increased if you apply to that range, somewhere around that range. And for me, I took that because I was like, you know what, science, why not, right? So both cycles, I applied to 10 programs. Was there a reason why you chose to apply to 11 programs?
I wasn't as scientifically informed. Well, I had some, a friend or two say that was how many they had applied to, and applying to more felt like a lot of work. And applying, and I just wanted to kind of look broadly. And these were the programs that I also think, when I did the research, looked like potentially the best fit. And so it happened to be, within that range of 9 to 12. And I do think it was a good amount of work to prepare all those applications. It took a good amount of time, money too, to prepare the application fees. From City Year, I was able to get some waivers for application fees for some of the programs. So if you've had, you can look into each program and see if any of your, like, whether it's, your demographics, your experiences, programs you've been a part of can get that application fee waiver. But this kind of just number, it was kind of a little bit random, but also felt, doable. And so that's what I did.
All right, awesome. So when you were applying for PhD programs, did you reach out to any faculty? And then if so, what happened? Like, did they respond? What was that process like?
Yeah, I did. I reached out, I think for every program that I applied, I reached out to at least one person who I might want to work with. I think I reached out to them probably in late October to November. If applications were due mostly in December, I probably mostly November I reached out. So maybe about a month before applications were due. And what I said was, I actually do have a copy here. I pulled up what I had said in an email, so I can just kind of skim over what I had done. So I said, I am a licensed social worker and currently a lab manager, and I named the lab that I was working for, studying psychosocial adaptation in children from a developmental perspective. I'm excited to be applying to PhD programs this cycle. Your work on, and then I would explain what their work was that I was excited about, is very much in line with my research interests and experiences, and I think it would be a privilege to work with you in the XYZ program. I am writing to ask whether you plan to accept a graduate student for fall 2020. I've attached my CV for reference, and if you have time, I would love to hear more about your current projects and future directions. During my PhD, I'm broadly interested in studying XYZ. Thank you so much for your time. And then I would attach my CV and send it off. It took me a while to workshop an email like that. Looking at it now, like maybe even a little bit shorter would have been better, but I sent this off. I heard back from some faculty, some I didn't hear back from. One faculty member connected me with one of her students. So I got to talk to a current student in one of the programs. And another faculty member I did get to chat with for a bit, but mostly either no response or thanks for letting me know. I'll look for your application. So that, but I decided to give it a shot and reach out to at least one person in every program. Yeah, so that was how I did it.
That's interesting, that last response, because yeah, well, because I honestly I did the same thing. I also reached out to faculty when I was applying, and I don't think or this last cycle I didn't. When I was applying for PhD programs, I didn't, and the reason why was because when I applied for master's programs a few years before, and I did that, no one responded, or I got a generic response. They literally told me straight up like, "Oh, we don't want to make contact with students because we're currently in the process, and we don't want to give an advantage to someone." They told me that in a generic email
Yeah.
response, and so I was okay, that makes sense, right? But so then I was thinking like, okay, in this new process, my PhD process, why am I gonna waste my time, I guess, reaching out? But I would say you should reach out. I just like don't follow what I did because honestly, you want to know if they're going to be able to take students, because if they're not going to take students, then you're going to get accepted and you're wasting your time, money, and things along that nature applying, right? So you want to know like, okay, are you accepting students? And if so, then you can apply. Then I would suggest that you apply. But if they're like, oh no, I'm going on sabbatical. Oh no, I already have a full, cohort of students that I'm working with. I can't support one more. Then that at least gives you an idea of if you're willing to apply, or maybe switch, advisors, or look for someone else that might support you, etc. So definitely reach out, even if you receive a generic response or no response at all. At least you're making that effort, and you might get a response, and you might get your questions answered.
Yeah, and actually, I'll add one more thing because it's a great point. Before you send an email, check the website. Sometimes a program's website will say, like, please don't reach out. We're not going to respond because of maybe that equity reason, or it's just a blanket policy that they're not going to reach out. So then don't do it. If they don't want you to, then there's no need to reach out. And also look at the faculty, if you can find information about the faculty member you are applying to. Sometimes if they have a lab, they say on their website, we will be accepting graduate students for fall 2020. Then you don't have to ask if they're accepting graduate students, but you can still send an email and you can say, I saw you're accepting graduate students, and then whatever else you want to say in the email. So do that little bit of that work beforehand, just because then you'll be the most informed about the best way forward with that individual program or faculty member.
Yeah, so I recently got a question from a subscriber asking if there is an advantage or disadvantage to reaching out to faculty. In your opinion, what do you think about this?
I would say that there is no disadvantage unless unless it says on their website, don't reach out, or unless it says on their website, we are taking students. So then just don't ask, are you taking students? So like for those reasons or anything similar, the only disadvantage can come from like showing that you didn't check their website. And then it's like not the end of the world, but it's also not really the best thing either. Otherwise, I don't see any disadvantages really. Advantages are that they at least can recognize your name as they're going through the applications, because they might take a glance at your CV, even if they don't respond. They might just take a glance at your email and see your CV and be like, oh, this looks interesting. And then they're reminded of that when they're looking through your application. And all the way to the best case scenario where a faculty person that you email is interested and says, yeah, sure, I'm happy to chat. Let's set up a time. And then you connect. And then they're already, gonna be really excited about you joining and be pushing for that within the application cycle, because sometimes the decision making behind the scenes can look different depending on the program and the university, but oftentimes it's a little bit of a joint decision where all of the faculty of that program who take PhD students might discuss and reflect after the interviews, like how did it go, who do we think would be a good fit. And so if you have someone in your corner who you've connected with over time, that can be really great. That actually, so for one program, I did get a response. I got to talk to this person for a bit back in like October. And then I didn't even, I was accepted to the program without interviewing, because maybe that counted as my interview. So something like really great, I think, did come out of that. So best case is pretty awesome. Worst case, just as long as you check their website, I don't really think there's too much of a worst case.
Yeah, one thing to add on that, because I agree with you. When I applied for PhD programs, I was applying to University of Washington, and the faculty member that I wanted to work with wasn't taking students, but because I had reached out to them prior to submitting the application, they actually recommended I spoke to someone else who did kind of similar work, and to see if we would be a good fit. So they recommended my application or my contact information to someone else, which I spoke to, and I didn't get accepted to the program. I think it was because of research fit, but I did have like an informal interview with that other person. And then we came to like a conclusion that we weren't a good fit together. We were discussing in like the informal interview, and I was telling this professor, like, here's what I want to do. And it just turned out that I was doing like higher education work, and she was doing K through 12. With that, like, our connection was family engagement, and we had that connection and access, but it was just different sectors. And so we just came out, we were like decided together, okay, we're not going to be a good fit. And they denied me, or I was rejected, which was fine with me, because, you know, they at least took time to talk to me rather than just like give me a straight up rejection. And I think it was because of that initial contact with the professor that I want to work with, who recommended I spoke to this person instead. So yeah, so I think that you should definitely reach out and try to make those connections. But if you don't receive a response, don't think too much about it. I don't think it's going to affect your application at all if you don't speak to anybody. But as long as you try to make that connection, it could only help you. So you did get accepted into 10 graduate programs. Why do you think you got accepted? Like, what was that like key thing that made your application stand out that you think?
Yeah, I think one was probably fit, just that I did take the time to see if I was really aligned, as far as I could tell from their website and from their papers, with the faculty members that I was applying to work with, and with the programs as a whole that I was trying to work with. So fit, I think, helped in some cases. Having some research experience is probably helpful. Like, having been a lab manager, I was able to say, that I had written IRB, their institutional review board. So if you're working with people, then you have to put this whole application process in through the university. And I was able to say I've done that process as a lab manager, and being able to run and design experiments and do studies. But I think what was helpful, what I tried to do, at least hopefully it came across, was that when I interviewed, I was excited and interested. Like, I genuinely was too. Like, I was so excited to meet all these different faculty during the interview process that I've been reading so much about, and I tried to let that come across in interviews, or at least like show interest in their work, and show that I'd read it, and that I had some questions about it to try to like push it even further, and see what could come out of the work they were doing, or to see like what they were excited about. And so I think some of that might have been helpful too. But I do think like some of that background of doing the research into the programs, and I'll add that like then so I can talk about my statement of purpose for a second, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go for it.
Okay. So I think what I tried to do with my statement of purpose was I drafted one that was like kind of just not tailored specifically to a program, but just me talking about my interest, a story that had stuck with me, and my own background and my own experiences and my own interests. And then I took like this baseline like template, this draft, and I tried to tailor it to each of the programs that I applied to. Sometimes there'd be like 3 programs that pretty much was the same. I didn't have to do that much tailoring, maybe just change the names of the professors I wanted to work with. But there were some really big differences between the programs that I applied to at the same time that I tried to pay attention to. So if you're looking at like kind of a range of types of programs, this might apply to you, even within generally the same fields, because all of my programs were like mental health education related. But what I found was that some programs I was applying to were very applied in nature, meaning that they were like in schools, in communities, they would find things out and then create a workshop or an intervention. And it was very much like very active in that process. And some other programs that I applied to were more developmental, basic science, mechanistic, understanding, and trying to like collect data to develop broad generalizations about social emotional development, for example. So even though both could be very closely related to social emotional development, it's just 2 kind of approaches. And then I tried to be aware of that when I was writing my statement of purpose. And if I interviewed at that program when I talked about it, because I definitely was interested in both. I leaned a little bit more to applied, which is why I'm at the program that I'm at. But I think picking up on their mission statements, picking up on the words the faculty use to describe their own research and interest, not necessarily copying, pasting what they say, but to recognize where their motivation for science was coming from and trying to match that, being genuine also, but recognizing that like I also was really trying to see how much I could fit into these different programs. So I think that might have been helpful also.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think fit is super important, especially for PhD programs. I feel like master's programs, it's not as important, but PhD is super important. Like if your research does not fit with the faculty member, you're probably going to get rejected, even if you have like the perfect GRE scores, the perfect GPA, you're probably going to get rejected. And then also the mission statement, like tailoring your application to the values, the mission of the program is very important. I always give the example from my personal experience. I applied to Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt education programs are very like focused on quantitative methods. And I'm a qualitative researcher, so obviously I shouldn't have applied, to be honest. I got rejected, by the way, but I shouldn't have applied because literally their website screamed quantitative, quantitative, quantitative. And I was like, you know what? No, Vanderbilt's a good program. Like I'm gonna apply. You know, it's a top 10 program nationally, especially for I applied to ed policy and higher education programs, just kind of like a mix of those. And so they're very well known for education policy, but obviously they use quantitative methods to inform policy. And I knew that because I read the freaking website and I watched some webinars, but I still applied and I obviously got rejected. And the reason why was because I was literally proposing a qualitative study in my statement of purpose. And clearly I knew the mission, I knew their value, I knew what they cared about, and I neglected that. So the reason why I'm saying this is because that's very important. Do your research. And if you don't fit, even if it's a great program, if you just don't fit, then personally, I don't think you should waste your time and resources to apply. Because I've seen it like from multiple people experiences, like they get rejected because it's not a good fit. Same thing happened to me with Stanford. Like Stanford did not have what I wanted to research or even anything comparable to what I want to research. I still applied, got rejected. So fit does matter. And I think fit determines if you're going to be accepted or not. And obviously you could tailor your application to fit whatever program you want to get into. So for example, if it was Vanderbilt, you're like, yeah, I'm the greatest quantitative researcher, and then you're not, and then you end up going there, you're gonna have a miserable time. So it's not just you fitting with them, but them also fitting with you. So don't just try to go for like that Ivy League institution if it doesn't fit with you. Go with the program like Becca has been sharing, like with the program that really speaks to you, where you can see yourself grow as a researcher, and then obviously with whatever career goal you have in mind, go with those programs. That's kind of how I decided to come to UCSD, was because it was a program that I saw myself growing in, and having that just kind of support with faculty, staff, cohort, and obviously community as well was part of my decision too, because there's a lot of Latinos that live in San Diego. So that was important to me as well when I was deciding. And I talked about that in my statement of purpose. Like, here are some of the reasons why I want to come here, and they really fit. And I think maybe they saw like my interest, obviously, and like kind of like my heart, I guess, like with why I wanted to be there. And it does come across, by the way, statement of purpose, you can tell if someone's just applying for the name or because they actually want to be there.
Yeah, great points.
So I get a lot of questions about standardized testing or even GPA. Can you share a little bit about your GRE scores, and do you think that GRE scores are important for grad school admissions, especially for the PhD program?
Okay, yeah. Well, no, I don't think that GRE scores are that important. First of all, I mean, we're filming this in January 2022. I think every day I hear more and more programs that are getting rid of GREs, which I think is fantastic. They're not a good measure really of your capacities and capabilities, and we've known that for a long time. So hopefully we're continuing to move in that direction. I can share with you what my GRE scores was. I don't know if these were typical or not, but I went and looked them up. I got 161 verbal, 158 quantitative, and 4.5 on the writing. I don't even think all my programs needed it, actually. I can give some tips as to studying for it if it's helpful. And I can also share an experience I had as a lab manager when I got to actually be on the back end a little bit with the professor. Hope it's okay if I talk about it, because I don't know if I was supposed to, but I helped a little bit when we got PhD applicants for one of the cycles. In terms of studying, there are a good amount of free resources that are out there now, like different apps and websites and books, and like being able to like rent some of that from the library if it happens to be near you. I think that what I could have done better for the GRE too was to practice the timing of it. It was so quick, and I hadn't really practiced with the timing and like getting it down in that time. So there were just sections that, I just didn't finish. So if you're like able to do a practice test or two to time yourself and to start to get some of that speed down and figure out the strategies that work for you. That being said, all of this being said, when I was a lab manager, I was looking at with the PI, we were kind of discussing who might join the lab. This was a developmental psychology lab at Boston University. And a lot of these students were either in undergraduate at the time that they were applying or pretty recently graduated. And there was one student who was such a good fit, really aligned, like had, the CV, according to the professor, was really great, and had also on the math, I think something in like the 25th percentile or so. I don't remember exactly what number it was. And with math, with quantitative, this was like a pretty quantitative program. I'm not personally very quantitative at the moment. I'm hoping to learn more about quantitative methods in the future. But this was something that developmental psychology sometimes can be pretty quantitative. And so I remember talking to the professor, though, the person who, I was his lab manager, and he's like, maybe we make an exception. Like everything else is really a good fit, and we know all the problems with standardized scores. And so if there are other things that you can highlight within your application, that's awesome. Because I think more and more people are like that professor was at that time, where they're like, it's okay. This isn't going to be a deal breaker. I can't say that everyone feels that way, but I think we're going to see that more and more. So I wouldn't say to let your GRE scores hold you back from something you're really excited about. And yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, I just kind of give my experience with GRE. Like my GRE scores were lower than Becca's. So, and honestly, I didn't care for the GRE because we're in education, first of all. So maybe you know your field a little bit. So I feel like, I don't know why, but I'm not an expert in this area, but I feel like sciences it does matter more than it does in like education. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's kind of my inclination. But like for education, like there's always that debate, like standardized testing, it doesn't really equate to intelligence or someone capable of finishing a program, right? So
Yeah.
knowing that, I was like, you know what, why am I gonna waste all my time studying if I already know I suck at standardized testing? So why put my all my energy in that, and why not put it in something else like the statement of purpose, for example? So my strategy was actually not to focus on studying at all. I didn't even study for the PhD cycle at for GRE, and mostly because I already had a master's and I kind of already had experience that could kind of offset a lower GRE score, right? And then my GRE scores were like 140 something, like super low. I think it was like 145 or something for both sections. And then I got a 4.5 in the writing as well. So I think it just depends on, first of all, try your best. I'm not gonna say don't study, try your best. Try your best. If you could study, study. But if you get a low score, don't stress too much about it. Like try to figure out other ways you can offset that low score. And I do have another video on GRE, I guess prep and how to kind of go around the GRE process, which I'll link down below. But also just to kind of go off of that, like what I did was to offset like a low quantitative score, I kind of showcased with like my math undergraduate courses that I could do math-based, science-based courses. So I did well there. And then because I know that PhD programs are very writing heavy, I obviously got a pretty good score on the GRE writing portion, but I also had some other distinctions that were writing focused. So for example, like my undergraduate school, they, as a junior, you have to take this thing called the junior writing portfolio. And on with that, you have to do like a time test, kind of like the GRE, a time test, and then submit your 3 best works. And then they assess it and then they determine if you pass, don't pass, or you get distinction, which this distinction means that you're top 10% in your junior class. And I got distinction. So I put that on my CV and I put that on my application to showcase that I was a strong writer, because I knew that at the PhD level, you're going to be writing a lot, you're going to be reading a lot. So I wanted to showcase to the committee, even though my GRE scores in like the reading comprehension and the writing were, my reading comprehension sucked, but my writing was okay. Here's other ways that I have showcased my writing skills via my statement of purpose, other distinctions, other writing projects. And then I think for this UCSD application, I had to submit a writing sample. So I submitted like one of my best writing samples. So I found other ways to offset some of my what's it called, weak points of my application. So I suggest that if you are someone who doesn't do well with standardized testing, or maybe your GRE scores are low, find other ways with the application so you can like offset that low GPA, that low GRE score, whatever it is that you have a weakness in, offset it with something else. Let's move on to the interview experience. So we know that you got into 10 programs. Can you talk to us about when you heard back from programs? Like when was like maybe the month, maybe time frame? Because a lot of viewers do ask about that. Like when, you get anxious once you submit your application, you're like, when do I hear back? And stuff like
Yeah.
that. So maybe shed some light on like when you heard back, and then maybe talk about how many interviews you had within those 10 programs.
Yeah, sure. I totally feel that anxiety. I had it too. So most of my applications were due early December, December 1st, December 10th, December 15th. Maybe even all of them were due around then. And I started hearing back from some programs in January or February. And then I had interviews in January or February, I think, or maybe even March, but around like those couple of months of a time span is when I started to hear back from some programs.
And how many interviews did you have for your 10 programs? Was it all 10 or was it just a few?
Yeah, no, I had 7 interviews. So I had, and I can share more about what they looked like at each of the programs, but I
Yeah,
had
of course.
interviews with NYU, Boston College, Boston University, and University of Illinois at Chicago in person. And then remote, I had UC San Diego, USC, and UC Berkeley. And I did not have any interviews at Harvard, at University of Washington, UC Santa Barbara or Stanford. I didn't get into Stanford at all. At Harvard, I got into the master's program, and I don't think do they interview for their master's? Yeah, they don't interview for their master's program, so I didn't get an interview there. And then I don't know, University of Washington and UC Santa Barbara. UC Santa Barbara was the program that I had been able to connect with a faculty member beforehand, and so I didn't do the formal interview process. And University of Washington, I'm not sure what happened, but I did not interview with them.
Can you speak about what was that process like? Like you mentioned in person, and then you mentioned also virtual. Like, can you speak about those?
Yeah, for sure. So I was thinking about it because there were two very distinct types of interview experiences I had. One was in person and a full day, and the other was remote and really just like an hour or so with one faculty member. When I look at it, it might be along the lines of like the full day ones in person were more of the applied human development community psychology programs, and the remote ones were more of the education and also social welfare. I'm not sure if that distinction always holds, but that might be why they were so different. But the ones that were in person, so I got an email in maybe January or so, and inviting me to come visit their campus for like usually it was an evening dinner with students beforehand, and then they would send me a schedule of the faculty that I was meeting with the next day. And it was all expenses paid for these. So they would refund your travel to the place that you were interviewing at if you needed to travel. So the full day ones, it was pretty intense. It was fun. There's a lot of adrenaline, but it was definitely pretty intense. So the dinner beforehand, most of these programs had a dinner beforehand with students, with current students. So you get to meet everyone else who's applying with you, which might be up to 10, 20 other prospective PhD students, and a handful, all these places, like a good amount of current PhD students. And it's a relaxed atmosphere. One of them was at someone's house, one was at a bar, one was at a restaurant. So kind of different places. And it's relaxed, and it's also, you still want to, bring your A game, because these students are typically asked by the program, what did you think? It's more of like if there's any major red flags, that's when they'll be communicating that with the program. Otherwise, I do think it's typically up to the faculty to make those final calls, but hopefully student input really matters. And like, I would want to be at a program where the current student input really matters. So you want to go, you'll want to just have some questions maybe in your back pocket about just really general, like what's it been like to be as part of this program, or what projects are you working on now? Like, why did you decide this program? All those different things. It's so important, as always, to just be to be genuine and also be respectful of the people that you meet, whether that's the person sending you the email, other prospective applicants, like all of that is important always, just as a person, but also definitely you want to be doing that as you're applying. All of that is things that can be picked up on, and these might be your future colleagues also. You might be accepted with these other people in the room or see them later on in your career. And so, you just want being friendly if you can, and ready to go. And then the next day, what happens is they'll send you a schedule. Sometimes you might stay with a student. I did that at NYU. I stayed with a current student, and then the next morning you go to the university. They typically have a breakfast and a welcome, and they'll explain what the day is about. And then you run around to different rooms in the department all day. So you might have 20 minutes with one faculty member, and then 20 minutes with another, and 20 minutes with another. I think at NYU, Boston College, Boston University, and University of Illinois at Chicago, I probably met with 6 or 7 faculty members back to back. And it was me running around. It was the prospective applicants running around and finding the room numbers. They're very nice, and people will help you if you're lost. But yeah, like you're exhausted by the end of the day for sure. It's a lot to keep track of and a lot of people that you're meeting, a lot of impressions, but they'll typically serve you lunch, and it's another informal time to get to chat with faculty or current students. And then there's usually a wrap up at the end. So maybe the whole day is like 9 to 4, and then you go back to your hotel or someone's house, and then you just wait to hear back from them, which is another nerve-wracking part. That's kind of what an in-person interview experience might look like. You get the names of the faculty ahead of time that you're going to meet, so that can be really key. And then for my 3 programs that were remote, UC San Diego, USC, and UC Berkeley, it was a conversation with my prospective advisor remotely for about an hour or so, and then got to visit that university later. So they had like an in-person visit day that was scheduled for after that, so I could still get to know the school and get to meet people in person, but the interview process was done entirely remotely, and it was a little bit more comfortable just because I could be like home and just have one meeting as opposed to like have a full interview experience, but still definitely something to prepare for. And yeah, so those, it's kind of all over the place, but those are some of my experiences.
That sounds intense, especially the in-person ones. Like, I think I would just be nervous the whole time to be
Yeah.
honest. But in terms of those experiences, how did you prepare? So for the in-person, did you bring like, I don't know, CVs, like copies of your CV? What did you bring to the space? Who was in the space? So you did mention like the dinner, right? So or the dinner, the lunches, the dinners, breakfast, like there's current students, there's obviously the prospective or the people interviewing, there's faculty. But when you were like in those meetings, was it just you and the professor like speaking about what? What did you talk about? What did they ask you?
Yeah. So for the in-person ones, that big day of the interview was that breakfast, and the orientation, like the welcome, was with all the prospective applicants in one room together. Sometimes they combine some programs. I remember in Chicago, like there were different types of psychology that they were interviewing for at the same time. So it felt like a lot of prospective applicants. There were maybe like 30 of us in the room, but maybe like a quarter of us were applying for community psychology, the one that I was going to do. And then when I rotated and ran around the building meeting with different faculty, it was just me and a faculty member. It was just the 2 of us in a room together. For one of the programs, actually, sometimes that faculty member was joined by one of their current students, actually. So that is something that will most likely be on your schedule. So all those like official meetings that are on your schedule, you know who the people are who are going to be there. Of course, you be prepared in case schedules change, but they do try to let you know ahead of time who exactly you'll be meeting, what times, so you know how long. And so how I prepared was largely like just getting to know the faculty from afar as much as I could, reading some of their papers, getting to know, reading their CV if I can find it, getting to know what their interests are, maybe what their career path had looked like. So I would read, some of their work, and I did bring a CV. I don't think I ever needed to pass it out, but like I did bring one, and just like a water bottle, really nothing else besides like the schedule that you have with you with the room numbers. And then I definitely, so I read a lot of their work, tried to get to know them. I think there were 2 things that I spent the most energy on. One was thinking of questions to ask them, because every time that you interview in many different, situations, there's a time when they say, do you have any questions? And it's really great to have questions in your back pocket that you can ask. And so I did spend a good amount of time trying to think of questions that would, indicate that I had read their work. So I wanted to show like I'm invested and I've read and I've prepared, and also something to indicate like my interest in working with them. So I might have asked a question like, oh, I read your study on ABC. I was thinking it could be cool to do a follow-up study on this. What do you think of that? And so in that quick 20 minutes that I have with them, when I'm asking maybe one of 2 or 3 questions that I really want to convey that I've read their work and I'm interested in potentially working with them because we have something in common.
Mhm.
So I really spent time like thinking of questions like that, trying to think of questions that would get them excited too, like because everyone always feels better when they're also excited about something that you're talking about. So what might this person just be happy kind of to discuss with me? I also, so 2 things. One, I spent a good amount of time just thinking of questions tailored to the different individuals that I would work with. I also, because I think I made a mistake on this for my 20-minute interviews, a few times I hadn't prepared as well, and I asked a more general, broad question, and of something like, what inspires you, or how'd you get into this work? And I left feeling like they don't think I've read their work. And I only had 20 minutes, and I wish I had done something different. So trying to tailor it as much as can. And then 2, definitely spending time like rehearsing my pitch. When someone asks you, what are you interested in studying? Why did you apply to this PhD program? Who are you? Like, tell me about yourself. To have things ready to answer to each of those questions. You don't necessarily have to memorize it. It can be nice if it's off the cuff a little bit, but to feel like you're able to be confident and explain why you're there and why you want to be there in the first place. And so rehearsing can be helpful, at least for just like what your pitch is about what you're interested in studying a little bit, just so you can get down to like a line. And otherwise just having thought through, which you probably did already because you spent so much time applying to this school, like why you're applying and what you're interested in. There were some questions that like I wasn't as prepared for. One was like, someone asked, what are you most worried about when it comes to getting your PhD? And so I had to think off, sometimes you just can't really prepare as well. I don't know. I didn't think of that question. So thinking on, hopefully like through the day, you both get more exhausted and get used to kind of thinking on your feet. So it does, like the day can go by pretty quickly too. And like typical things like strengths and weaknesses, and to showcase, I got a few questions about my topic. Like I was talking a little bit about well-being curricula in schools, like social emotional learning is a similar kind of concept. And someone asked me, why do you think they have more of these for elementary students than for adolescents? And I needed to have an answer to that. So being familiar with the topic that you're interested in too, you might get some questions on. One more thing that I'll say that someone asked is like, if you were to design a study right now, what would it be? I stumbled a little bit on this one, even though it sounds like something I could have predicted would happen. But I don't know that I gave the greatest answer. So and Google this. So like research, common PhD questions, interview questions for your field, and some of these can be found. So not everything, but you can start to get a sense of like what questions might be.
Cool. So before we started recording, I asked you about this just to kind of get your experience. So you mentioned something about a writing. I think, was it a writing task where they asked you to do something? One of the schools.
Oh yeah.
Can you speak about that?
Yeah. So for one of the programs, this one I actually interviewed remotely for. And so I spent some time with the potential advisor, actually about an hour and a half. This one, actually, she started with like, really broadly, tell me about yourself and your path and how you got here. So also just be ready for some of those like larger, more general questions. They're trying to get to know, I think, just how you think and how you work and how you make decisions in your life and what drives you and what you're passionate about. So I interviewed with her, and then like a couple days later, I should pull it up and see exactly what it was, but she sent an email saying, we have this writing task. I think I only had like 3 or 4 days to do it, which I was able, it was better than it being like, and in the next hour, respond to this email. Though I did feel like I did have a question about equity with that. Like there are definitely applicants who are working, who have kids, who have any number of reasons why they wouldn't be able to get that back in 3 or 4 days. But I tried to do it, and she gave me like a backstory for an idea for a study. and or a research question, basically. I think she gave me like an idea for a research question that turns out to be something she was actually really researching. And I needed to come up with how I would study it. So I would need to, in just like a page or two, talk about the data collection, like which data I would want to answer that research question, how I might analyze it, how I might recruit, who my participants might be. So that was the only thing that was out of the norm of interviewing and having those one-on-one conversations with faculty.
That's interesting because I haven't heard of that before, but it makes sense. And just kind of, I guess something that I do talk about a lot, especially when I make videos about statement of purpose, is you want to talk about your experience with research, right? And you want to like be detailed, like what were your questions? So if you did conduct a study, what were your questions? What were your methodologies, your theoretical frameworks? Those type of questions, those type of things you need to answer in your statement of purpose, because for this purpose, I always like tell the viewers, like, you want to show that you have a command of the research process. And I think that maybe that activity that you had to do was part of that, right? So they want to know, like, does this person actually know how to conduct research? And, you know, because obviously as a PhD student, we have to do that. And our, you know, final milestone is to conduct this huge study, right? And so I'm thinking that maybe that's why, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. But I feel like if you don't have research experience, then you should read up on it, to be honest, especially at the PhD level, because a PhD is a research degree. And if you can't showcase some type of skill sets that you have in research, whether it's formal or informal, then it's going to be really difficult for you to get into a PhD program. And that activity that they had you do during the interview or after the interview, it's kind of like a testament to that. Like, they want to know, like, do you know how to conduct research, I guess. And if you know, if you can't state that in your statement of purpose or maybe your CV, then it might be difficult for you to be able to get into a program. I don't know if you ever heard of anybody getting into a PhD program without research experience, because I don't think I have. And I wonder if that's how you go around that. If you don't have formal research experience, how do you go about that? And so I wonder, I don't know if you know anything about that.
That's a great question. I do think most of the people, if not everyone that I know, has some sort of research experience. And, you know, it makes me think of, though, like that, like a point we were talking about earlier, where they're, you know, thinking of all your experiences, whether work related or life related, but you're watching this video, and that means that, you know, you're alive and you've done lots of things and lots of things have happened. And so there are really core parts of the research experience, like thinking of questions, the curiosity, like natural curiosity, thinking of questions, being detail oriented, you know, being like having initiative and drive, and in our field too, just passion and love for communities and commitment to communities, commitment to education, all these things that like you didn't necessarily maybe directly be in research about all of that, but all of those can really come out in the way you write your personal statement or what you say in an interview. So I do agree that like having a solid command of the research process would be really helpful. That could look like reading some different papers, or you know, getting involved in research if you can, and also to think of those like amazing skills and traits that you already have and experiences you've already have, and reach out to me, reach out to Ivan to talk about how that can also translate into some sort of like research oriented message that you can bring to the table.
Yeah, definitely comment down below if you have any questions, because I can answer those there as well. But also you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. What advice would you give students who have upcoming interviews, or maybe future prospective PhD applicants?
Yeah. First, I'm excited for you if that is you. I think it something I haven't talked about as much is, and that Ivan mentioned, is it's also an opportunity for you to interview them. So at the end of the day, like if you know, it's something that you're interviewing them to see if you want to spend a lot of your time and energy and investment in. So know that you're coming in, you got to this stage, and that says something. The reason that you're at that stage is if you're about to interview, is that they see something in you. And so already, like, if you can muster a little bit of that confidence to know that they see something in you and they're excited about you. So take that time to like really get to know them, ask them good questions, and be genuine. Like, if working with your community, a certain community, is why you're doing this work, then that's amazing. And if you speak to that and speak about that, hopefully you're interviewing at a place that wants that for you too, and is going to align with that vision and support you in that vision. So being genuine in what you're interested in, as much as possible, I think, can be really helpful. And then I know it's easier said than done, but trying to enjoy it. Like, you know, if this is something you're going to do for the next couple of years in your life, like this is your kind of first step into meeting these people that you might work with for a long time. And these are probably people that like have done research that really excites you. And so if you can, like, trying to enjoy it and to lean into that a little bit, like, definitely know it's uncomfortable and it's scary, and also can be super fun, and you can meet really, really cool people through the process too. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think on the practical end, I think I would say prepare. Like, don't just go and wing it. Like,
Yeah.
I have a tendency to go wing. I have a tendency to wing a lot of things, and honestly, I think I did wing my PhD interview with my advisor when I was applying here. But I think it was more. I did like reread my resume, my statement of purpose, things like that. But I think that because I did have like this purpose, like what I spoke about earlier, like I had this purpose. I didn't really care. Maybe I did. I don't know. But like it wasn't so much pressure for me to get denied. For example, like if it wasn't going to be a good fit because they didn't fit with my passions, then so be it, right? I obviously applied to many programs, and I wanted to go to a program that really valued me and my experiences and what I wanted to do in the future. So if that program, didn't fit with me, then I wasn't. Obviously, I was a little bummed, but it wasn't the end of the world. I wanted to make sure that I went to a program that, you know, met my needs, but also obviously that I contributed something to the cohort or the program. And the interview was just a way for me to kind of affirm that, this faculty member is who I want to work with, because obviously the only information that I had gained prior to the interview was through websites. And maybe I did talk to a couple of my advisees, and so they kind of gave me like a little perspective of how the advisor worked and so forth, but I didn't get to meet her until the interview part. So I was interviewing her too. I was trying to, feel that vibe. I go off of like energy, and if we didn't match energies, then I don't think it would be a good fit. And she even commented on my energy during the interview. And so she was like, "Oh yeah, you sound really excited. It seems like you're friendly, a team player," even though I didn't talk about teamwork and anything that she asked me, but she, I guess, was seeking someone that was going to be a good fit for her group, right? Her rack, because we have racks, we have research groups here in our program, and so I think she was trying to figure out if I was going to be a good fit with her already advisees, and maybe that's why she commented on my energy, and that energy translated into being a good team player and someone who would be willing to, support other cohort or support other people in her rack, in her research group. And so I thought that was interesting because I was expecting more of a traditional, here are some questions, answer them. And it wasn't even like that. Like, it was so informal for me. Like, she was literally wearing a hat. I was like wearing my like freaking a tie and like being professional, right? And she was just casual, like talking to me like, "Oh, I read your application. I know a little bit about you. Can you talk to me a little bit more about this thing that I did," right? And she talked about like things that we had in common. Like, I worked for federally funded programs. She does research with federally funded programs. We ended up figuring out that we had common like colleagues. So like she knew people that I knew and so forth. And it was like a conversation, like if this person was my friend. It didn't even feel like an interview. And she asked me questions in a conversation, not just like, "Tell me about yourself. Now do this. Now do that." It was like, okay, she did ask me, oh, you tell me a little bit about yourself, where did you grow up, blah, 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 all that stuff. And then she made connections with what I was saying. So she mentioned things like I actually grew up in California. I was born and raised there. And she mentioned like, oh, I work with this population there as well, and so forth. And so she was trying to make these connections. And I don't know, I just felt right. And that's obviously why I chose this program. But also I think the interview really helped me like decide where to go. And the other programs that I got accepted into, I did not interview for. And for me, and I didn't even go visit because obviously the situation that we're in, I wasn't able to go out to their campus and visit. Even though I could have scheduled or Zoom meetings, I didn't do that just because I was like, okay, I'm already set on UC San Diego. Like I liked my advisor, I liked the funding package. And I think me interviewing my potential advisor was key for me deciding if I wanted to come here, if it was a good fit. But yeah, so that was kind of like my experience in terms of interview, and it felt so informal, didn't even feel like an interview. So I think it's a good contrast to kind of your more structured, like running around.
Yeah, I think exactly. Like, I think the ones that were remote for me were more like that. They felt more conversational. The ones that were more formal they were so fast. You just felt like you had such limited time to get to know this person. But I 100% want to highlight what you said about like at the end of the day, just trying to see if you want to work with each other. And that means more than just work. Like that also means just connecting and being able to chat and just kind of liking each other and imagining it being a pleasant work environment. So those are also things too that a potential advisor could be looking for. Like, yeah, do you have things in common? You don't need to have things in common, but just like informally, where did you grow up? Oh yeah, I haven't been there. Like, how was it? So those can totally be part of the conversation too. I would probably like just take the person's lead. If you're in an interview and they're just chatting and it's informal, totally lean into that, and that's great. And yeah, and try to just be yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely be yourself, because like I think at this stage when you're applying for PhD programs, usually the PhD is like the last degree or the last level of education, right? And you want to just you're going to be at that program for like 5+ years potentially. So you want to make sure you're going to be happy when you're there. Like, don't just go to a school because it has a great name, right? And maybe it's not supportive, or maybe it doesn't do the work that you want to do, because you're going to be miserable for 5+ years. So think about that as well. It's not, I think at the PhD level, and for me personally, it's not about the name. It's more about what you gain from the experience. And that's kind of how I'm taking it. Like I chose my program because I thought my advisor can help propel me to where I want to be sooner than maybe other programs. And because of her expertise, because of her network and so forth, I wanted to also have that network too that I can tap into in terms of what I want to do as my career goal. But yeah, so definitely interview them as well. Don't just be interviewed, because it's important for you to like each other, like Becca was saying, like each other, not just research career-wise, but also as a person. And I think that's like one of the biggest advice that I would give you in terms of the interview process. Let's kind of wrap this up since we've been talking for a long time. Is there anything that you want to share that we haven't spoken about, whether it's about research, interview, the application, whatever it is there any like last minute tidbit things that you want to discuss?
I think we covered a lot of it. I think it's so great that you who are watching this has found this show and has found Ivan, because there is so much hidden curriculum with this, and there can be so much privilege involved in graduate school in general and PhD programs because of all the steps that it takes, and how hard it is to know how to get in or what you need to do. So I think it's just great that you have this show, Ivan, and that we can hopefully shed a little bit of light on different parts of the process. And the best of luck to you if you are thinking of applying, if you are applying, if you already applied. Really best of luck. And you're probably going to ask me if.
Yeah, where can they find you? Where can they contact you? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So you are welcome to contact me anytime. My email address is relevine, RELEVINE, at ucsd.edu. I'm sure we could put that somewhere underneath this video. And I have a Twitter. I'm not really on it very much. I would say the best way to get in touch with me is by emailing me. I'm really, really happy to connect with you. Don't hesitate at all. I try to like reach out, be on different panels and do these things whenever I can, because I do feel like I learned a lot through the process, and want to be able to pass it along. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining me for like an hour and a half or maybe even longer. But I'll link all of her contact information down below, and you can also, view her website and maybe learn a little bit about what she does in terms of research and work. But if you have questions, you can always email Becca, but also you can comment down below and also contact me via LinkedIn or comments, and I will be able to answer your questions throughout, or maybe make other videos that can support other people in terms of your directed questions. But thank you again, Becca, for being here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
I hope this interview shed some light on the graduate school interview process and provided you with some strategies to tackle the graduate school application process. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next episode.